Well, we're live.
All right.
Welcome. So, all right, guys, we've got Adam Miller here from BuddingTech. So, we're here to talk all things medicinal marijuana, weed, and the future of health and wellness, I guess.
Yeah.
Would we say?
Yeah, I'd say so,
Go
indeed.
with that?
Yeah.
All right.
Plus a few other interesting terrains.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. So, Adam, tell us a little bit about yourself, mate. Tell, who are you? Where did this whole thing come from? Tell us, the floor is yours.
Well, who am I? That's a deep question, but I presume you're relating to the work sphere of my existence.
Oh, mate, we got plenty of time. Go anywhere. I don't want to know your weirder stuff. I'm sure there's some stuff that you just leave that out. But
that's in the closet. Don't worry, I didn't intend to bring that out today. Well, I'll speak professionally at this point. So I've been working in the medical cannabis space for about 5 years now. Mm-hmm. Pre-legalization in Australia, by the way, cannabis is medically legal in Australia as of 2016. I was in my parents' front yard, just having a read about some of the cannabis projects that were being developed in America. Mm-hmm. And I had an intuition that cannabis would be on the shores of Australia in a short period of time. So after thinking about it quite deeply and looking at different ways that I could enter the space, I took the leap and decided to build a business. Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting timing because at that moment I was exiting a business that I had started. I had kind of lost the passion for that project. Mm-hmm. And some of my friends thought I was crazy to even consider dropping my projects and just moving into cannabis because the perception was that Australia is too conservative, which it is. Yeah. However, so much so that it wouldn't introduce cannabis policies or regulations, for another 5 years. And lo and behold, 5 months later, legalization in Australia was a reality.
Really?
Yeah, November. It was the 16th of March 2016. Yep. The 3rd of March 2016, where cannabis was officially.
Did you get high that day?
Probably. For medical use only, of course.
For the sore knee.
Bum knee. Well, actually, if anything, I would use cannabis for ADHD.
Yeah, right.
I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child. I was brought up on Ritalin and other medications that were used to treat ADHD. Mm-hmm. And I have found in my time using cannabis that it can be a potent medicine to treat ADHD. Mm-hmm. And there is research that supports this. It's very minimal research, but research nonetheless. There's a researcher in the UK that conducted a 20-person trial in 2017 where he used a cannabis formulation of 1 milligram to THC to 1 milligram of CBD to treat patients with ADHD. Mm-hmm. And the results were quite promising. The decrease in hyperactivity, inattentiveness, and inhibition was quite notable, almost comparable to medications like Ritalin, which are common practice for today. So even though it's a laugh and we do joke, do you get high? It's the medical application of cannabis is quite profound. Mm-hmm. And if you would have asked me in 2015 if I thought cannabis had any medical application, I would have laughed and said no. Yeah. However, fast forward today, it's absolutely profound how deep the plant's medical potential is and the therapeutic application of cannabis. So it's a very important time that we are entering, and it's only going to continue escalating from here. Yeah,
for sure. Well, we'll get into all that stuff about the medical benefits and so on and so forth, but talk to me more about yourself a little bit. So I remember I read on the LinkedIn bio when I was, when we teed up the show and we were chatting back and forth. So you studied entrepreneurship in Melbourne, and you studied in Sweden as well. Is that right?
Yes. I studied
Swedish heritage, or
no? I just wanted.
Just like Swedish women.
I love Swedish everything.
Okay.
Swedish women are beautiful. The culture is cold but beautiful, and it's a gorgeous country. But I studied in part in Sweden and in part in Australia, primarily in Australia. I got a scholarship to study over there, which was a privilege. Yep. Bachelor of Business in Entrepreneurship. What a really interesting degree, because there's that debate between entrepreneurs. Is it a skill that is learned, or is it born? Are you born with entrepreneurship? And I argue that it's both. And that was really cool. It was 4 years of just building things and seeing if what would work and what wouldn't. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. Pops up.
Yeah. The other interesting thing I think with studies of entrepreneurship, for example, is I thought you were going to say it's that interesting discussion around, do you study entrepreneurship or do you go and be an entrepreneur? You know what I mean? Like practical versus,
Well, I think the practical is the study.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, Me, for example, like I've started 3 businesses.
Yep.
And never studied anything. You know, I've got like the hardest on-the-job training. I've failed at a lot of things, you know, but now I seem to be going all right. So it's just, what did the entrepreneurship course like when you left to go on to your first, you know, building business, you know, experience? What did you feel? Do you feel like really capable? Did you feel confident? Did you know? Like, tell me about your studies of entrepreneurship, because I'm actually genuinely interested.
Yeah, cool. So the interesting, so I studied entrepreneurship at a unique time at RMIT's history. It was the second or third iteration of the course. It previously didn't exist. And when I started, it was a very practical course where in the first year we started a business, we had to invest money into it. Okay. We worked with corporate ventures and assisted companies or startups building new projects, whether that be in an innovation department or a new startup that needed extra assistance, like an internship. So it was very hands-on. Cool. That rocked. When I got back from Sweden, they changed the course process and it became highly theoretical.
Right.
And the depth and value of what I initially had received changed. And you're right, there's no better experience than going out there and actually building a business.
Yeah, learning the hard way.
Yeah. However, I would recommend if anyone does want to study business or is going to do an entrepreneurship course, I'd recommend that they do it as they're starting a business or while they're in a business, so that they can take the actual theoretical knowledge and apply it to their practical business. I think that's a good coupling.
Yeah.
But if you're just going to study business and say you're an entrepreneur, it's entrepreneurship is earned, it's not studied. You're correct.
No, for sure.
I agree. And in my first few businesses, did it help? Maybe. I don't know. I didn't really draw upon my textbooks.
Yeah, that's right. But I'm sure, you know, there's things that, very simple things that I should have known when I started my first businesses that really hamstrung me, that I only learned 12, 16, 18, 20 months later. So yeah, I'm sure it would have helped. So tell me about your entrepreneur, you know, so from the studies, you said that you shut your company that was successful down to enter the medicinal marijuana field. Like, what were you doing? What were some of the things that you've done in the past?
Yeah, cool. But before I answer that, I want to ask, did you, on your journey, have any mentors when you started?
Sure. Yeah, for sure. So I've been very entrepreneurial from day one, really. I used to, when I was 14 years old, I used to jump the fence at my parents' property and go over to the Dunes golf course. Yeah. And I would go and steal the golfers' balls, wash them and sell them back to them. I bought my first ever CD, my first album doing that. That was my first system.
Yeah, great.
But no, then I ran my own business when I was 22 as a tradesman for a few years. But then my real first crack at being an entrepreneur, like a proper business, I guess, was Adventure Fit, which was we spoke briefly earlier, the travel company. So I'd take people on adventure holidays. And I had some really quality mentors early, and they all said, don't start this company, whatever you do. This is the hardest industry. It's a shit model, like blah, blah, blah. And I tend to agree with them after spending 5 years in the travel industry. But I have the world's best mentor in travel, really. He's a good friend of mine, Daryl Wade. He owns Intrepid Travel and Intrepid Group, and now Scalata Ventures, which is a VC fund for socially impactful companies, I guess. If you had have said to me, yeah, you get to pick one mentor, I mean, industry specific, like if you said you get to pick one mentor, I'd probably just be like, yo, Elon, fuck, what's happening? But he'd be like, what do you want me to help? Well, I can't help you. But if you had to, so we'd just be traveling to doing trips to Mars. But so I actually had Daryl as a mentor and a few other really great mentors, but Daryl was, he'd be my number one pick. If I had to redraft my mentors and in the travel industry, Daryl would probably be number one. So, and that was just through a bit of networking and, you know, being a nice guy to the right people and, you know, being genuine and whatever. People wanted to help. So why did you ask that?
Well, it's because you were saying before around kind of the key lessons, some of the things you hadn't learned at the start that you had to learn the hard way. I find mentors bridge that gap. And
100%.
Interesting segue. So you asked what I did prior to cannabis. So in 2010, I got my first kind of real job, and by real job, out of hospitality.
Yep.
My background initially was in hospitality. My father owned restaurants, and his dad owned restaurants, etc.
Yep.
And after that, I started working online marketing, and that's where I got my feet wet into tech and startups. And from 2010 to 2014, I played around with some startup concepts. However, when I moved to Sydney in 2012, I abandoned everything that I had in Melbourne. I didn't have any friends there, which was a blessing in disguise, because I had myself and my ideas that I could work on. So from 2012 to 2014, I just built startups. And the startups that I built was inspired by my time traveling in India. I noted that there were a lot of kids with entrepreneurial talent that were just roaming the streets, scamming people for money and trying to make a buck.
Very entrepreneurial.
Amazing.
Similar to my golf ball story.
Yeah, there's something there. There's something there. And my question was, what would happen if they had access to mentorship and the internet? So I started thinking about that, and I came home to Melbourne and built a website that connected people with questions to experts or mentors with answers via video chat. Cool. And this was really kind of video chat conversation technologies. And I built that out. Eventually, I got onto a program that was funded by ANZ. They had a accelerator called Innovise. I applied and successfully was approved, and I quit my job. And in 2014, I went full-time into startup land. And from there, I iterated and pivoted the concept from the initial, connect someone with a problem to an expert with an answer, to connecting startups to mentors, so that they could bypass certain challenges within the startup realm and hopefully succeed via, increased revenue, sales, capital raising, and so on. And then that evolved to a further step where we built a platform that a startup would come, they would take a test. It would evaluate the business out of a scoring rank of 100. And this was based on a scoring system that we had acquired from an American research institute. And from there, a company would get their score. And in the areas where they were lacking or where they needed improvement, we would connect them with a mentor that would specifically mentor them through the improvement process of that. In return for an equity share. So if I can help you achieve X, I take equity as my return, because mentors weren't, as I'm sure you know, encouraged by taking money from startups. They just wanted to help. But I felt help could be incentivized. And that was the business. And you said successful. It was successful in many respects. It was picked up by an accelerator. It had a number of staff members. We never successfully raised capital. However, I learned a few hard lessons in that experience, which is trust your intuition when it comes to humans. And at one point, I had a developer who was the co-founder, and at the 11th hour, we had a major tiff, and he walked. Well, I asked him to leave the business. So I had to start from scratch, and doing that all again from scratch, I just burnt out. I lost my passion. So it never took off.
It's hard, man.
Yeah,
sounds like an interesting model. To the mentor thing that when you mentioned earlier, I think I get a lot of questions on advice for starting businesses and so forth now, not because I know what I'm doing, but because I have a podcast, I have social media following, like people know that I do business. And my previous business, although it made little to no money, the brand was awesome, the product was sick, it was very cool, I guess. So people, would come to me for advice, and two of the things I mentioned, and it's funny, I've been saying this since before my new company, Athena, but Athena is an outsourcing agency, so we take really talented freelancers from all around the world and plug them into small business, basically. So the two things I've always said to people is find a mentor, whether they be, free or paid, whatever it is. Find a mentor who believes in you, who you trust, who's good, and find yourself some cost-effective help, because your first employee as a small business, I believe, shouldn't really be, if you're really just getting off the ground, shouldn't or doesn't need to be 50 grand per annum, So, and that's how I've done it anyway. So they're the two things that I've always recommended. And the mentor thing, I couldn't agree more. I think having most of what I think mentors do as well is just they give you accountability and they give you, validation to your own ideas. But you need that. Yeah, you so badly need that and then also they'll tweak little bits and pieces and say, hey, there's a huge gap here that you've missed in your, numbers or your or whatever, that stuff that you don't like doing. So I like the theory and the idea, but yeah, business is hard and you really got to get the right people beside you, don't you? And you can't really tell until you're in the trenches with them if it's going to be a relationship that's going to work or one that's going to potentially blow up, I guess.
Yeah, I was a kid. I didn't know much then, and I thought I was very much in the belief system that it would all work out.
Yeah.
It didn't really matter who you worked with as long as it just all came together. And
Yep.
over time you learn lessons. Trust your intuition, trust your gut, listen to people's advice, because I did have mentors that said this relationship's going to fail, and I didn't believe it. So it's all well and good to have a mentor, but also trust that mentor, listen to them, and perhaps pay for them, because free advice is free. If you pay with peanuts, you get monkeys.
Yeah.
So that's why I built a system where it was incentivized through equity, because it meant that the mentor had something that incentivized their intention, and the startup would have a stake in the ground and say, if you can achieve this, you get X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting. I learned a lot, and I'm very grateful for the experience.
Yeah, cool. So, all right. So flashing forward back to marijuana and so forth. So BuddingTech. So tell me about. This is your company now. We'll talk about marijuana in a global sense, throughout this interview. But talk to me about BuddingTech. Like, what is it? How does it work? Like, what are you trying to achieve there?
Yeah, cool. So in 2016, I started BuddingTech. The initial intention of this project was to create a platform for entrepreneurs to build businesses and launch into the cannabis space.
Yep.
I'd been working in startup land for 5 years, so I figured, why don't I build an accelerator or a model or an incubator that modeled the same principles of, any type of tech startup that was applied to cannabis, and take these businesses from idea or ideation to, pre-revenue or post-revenue.
Yep.
That was the goal. Overly ambitious, because I didn't realize how challenging regulations would be once cannabis was introduced. It was very idealistic, but it did get me a foot in the door, and from there I was able to work on a range of different projects. So the first thing I did in the cannabis space was manage a research project at the University of Sydney with one of the cannabis listed companies here in Oz. And that was very, very valuable, because it gave me a tool. We developed a white paper which did an assessment on the global industry as well as the local market. That was a tool that I could then use to reach out to other humans in the space to formulate relationships that would then lead to longer term value.
Yep.
So it was really a great lesson on put some value out there and then ask for something in return.
Yep.
And then from there, I evolved BuddingTech into a consultancy agency, which is what it is today. It's Australia's longest running medical cannabis consultancy firm.
Yep.
We've worked with a range of clients in the ASX space and private companies, as well as international companies, from research projects to license applications. We've assisted multiple universities setting up actual research hubs, which has been really fun and interesting, all the way down to working with doctors and prescribers, teaching them how to prescribe medical cannabis. So it's been a really valuable project. I'm actually stepping away from BuddingTech to work on more solo-related projects with other companies. I've just found that running an agency, it's been an interesting project, and it's been very challenging. And there's a lot of key lessons, again, in this whole space of setting up a new business that I hadn't initially had when I started BuddingTech that I have today.
For sure.
And now I'm actually starting a new project in a couple of weeks, which is with a major extraction company here in Melbourne. And they specialize in taking flower and turning it into oils and extracts, which then go to pharmaceutical companies or nutraceutical companies that can then convert it into a finished product. So kind of like a contract manufacturer for cannabis extracts, which I'm really excited about, because I see that as a major value add to the entire industry for a number of reasons, which we can deep dive into.
Very that last one that you mentioned very much went straight over the top of my head, but we'll touch back on that. So, but like marijuana for at a global scale. So why is medicinal marijuana important? Why do we have it? What are the benefits? What are some of the exciting studies? What are the risks? I'm going to probably play devil's advocate at some point here along the journey, but why medicinal marijuana?
Yeah, okay. Good question. Well, your body is literally hardwired to work with cannabis. So every mammal has what's called an endocannabinoid system. Now, this is a system that was discovered between the 1960s to 1990s in Israel by a researcher named Raphael Mechoulam. And what he had discovered is that this system is one of the most fundamental physiological systems in our body. It is the largest biological system of receptors across the entire body, and it interacts with the 11 major physiological systems in your body. So it sits in your immune system, it sits in your central nervous system, your peripheral nervous system, in the gonads, in the ovaries and the productive organs, in the brain, etc.
Yep.
So what this system does is it downregulates and upregulates neuroactivity across the body and keeps you in a state of balance. So it modulates what's called your homeostasis state. So regardless of your external environment, this system is keeping you in balance. And it was only discovered, less than a few decades ago, and yet it has such a prolific impact on human health. And the reason why cannabis is so interesting is because the chemicals that the cannabis plant produces interact with this system like a lock and a key. So the cannabis chemicals actually bind to the receptors in your body and modulate the functionality of those receptors to either downregulate or upregulate that activity.
So down-regulating parts of your body that are working too hard,
Exactly.
upregulating things.
Exactly. It basically is. It's like the way I describe it. It's almost like a conductor of a symphony. This endocannabinoid system. It's keeping everything in harmony and in balance.
Yep.
And if something is out of balance, and you use cannabis, and we can go into the science a little deeper because I'm being quite high level. It will, as I said, it will either increase the regulation or decrease it, so that it is back into a state of balance.
Okay, so this all sounds too good to be true. So, but, hear me out.
Yeah, of course.
So, but why is this? Because we understand with science, we're able to understand a lot of the processes inside of the human body and why we react to certain things the way that we do. So, talk to me and keep it at a high level if you can, because remember this, small, non-medicinally, medicated brain of mine at the moment is, and probably a lot of people listening are probably thinking, okay, how does this really work? So is there any reason why this would be the case? Like why, how?
Okay, so I'll take you back to some research that was conducted in Israel. It's really funny because it just demonstrates how savvy the Israelis are. In the 1960s, there was a researcher who confiscated, he took cannabis that was confiscated by police and took it to his lab and tried to understand what it actually is. And he isolated CBD and THC. He was the first person in history to do this. Then he put this into animal models, rodent models, and tried to understand the metabolic pathways, the actual signaling pathways in the mouses and rats' bodies that are activated during cannabis. And he found them. They're called CB1 and CB2 receptors. Then he found out that humans have those same receptors in their body. So upon further research, he found that your body produces chemicals that bind to those receptor sites. And it just so happens that the cannabis molecules also bind to those same receptor sites. So there's a link there. So your body produces what's called endogenous cannabinoids, which are molecules that activate these receptor sites. And the cannabis plants are producing molecules that are either identical to your body's own endogenous molecules or are enhancing the function of your body's endogenous molecules. So the long and short of it is, cannabis, through research endeavors out of Israel, was discovered to actually act on these internal systems within your body. And that's why we're finding that cannabis is so effective across a wide range of indications. Parkinson's disease, chronic pain, mental mood disorders, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, etc. Because it's actually targeting these cell receptor sites in your body that your body would naturally target without the cannabis itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes somewhat sense. So let me ask you this. So is it CBD molecules?
Yes.
So CBD1?
So the receptor sites in your body are called CB1 and CB2. So CB1 is primarily found in the central nervous system and in the peripheral nervous system, whereas CB2 is found in the immune system and the immune cells, as well as in the peripheral nervous system. So these two cell receptor sites are located across the entire body. And as I said, the chemicals that the cannabis plant produce target these sites like a lock and a key, because that's how receptor sites work. There's a molecule that will bind to a receptor and it will unlock it and it will make it work in a particular way. And cannabis does that with those two receptor sites, which are a part of the endocannabinoid system. Okay,
so is there any example for someone like myself who is, still trying to get his head around it, so of other plants and medicines and so forth that do a similar thing?
Well, Similar thing. Well, there's research that shows that the cannabinoids act on the same receptor sites in the brain as coffee.
Yep.
So coffee stimulates you and wakes you up. Cannabis also, the endocannabinoid system, I should say, is also responsible for your sleep cycles. So it plays a role in the functionality of sleep cycle. Other plants like the opioids act on the central nervous system, as well as brain block right here. So your respiratory system.
Yes.
So plant medicines, I mean, it's like any medicine has to have a drug interaction in your system. It's called pharmacokinetic. So when you take something, it enters your body, it's absorbed and goes to the bloodstream, and then there is a receptor site in your body that this molecule will bind to and then cause an effect. Cannabis is the exact same. It's a cause and effect relationship. It just so happens that the cause and effect relationship of cannabis is directly related to the endocannabinoid system, which is that homeostasis system in the body.
Okay, cool. So when we're talking about medicinal marijuana and so forth, and the industry that's growing and all these great results that have been found in studies all around the world, are we talking about actual medicinal marijuana, smoking a weed for pain relief? Are we talking about CBD oil? Are we talking about THC supplements? Like, talk to me about what actually are, how is it administered? Okay,
yeah, great. There's a number of ways you can administer it. So inhalation, which is smoking or...
Smoking a blunt?
Yeah, smoking a blunt. That's the basic way. That's I call it basic bitch way. That's really like...
You can say that on the show.
Yeah, I figured why not? Throw a bit of spice and pepper, which actually peppers. The smell of a pepper is called beta-caryophyllene. It's a terpene, and it's another part of cannabis, which you can talk about later.
Gotcha. But, now you're just getting weird on me.
Yeah, I like the technicals. I appreciate them because it's so important. But there are a number of ways to consume cannabis. The traditional way is inhalation. And inhalation is one of the most effective ways for instant relief because it's instantly absorbed. So basically the peak of action is kind of like this, and then it goes down. So you've got a quick spike and then a rapid decrease. Oral consumption of cannabis is a longer and more drawn out process where you'll take it and within 2 to 3 hours you'll have an effect and it'll
be more of a sustained effect?
Correct. However, the problem with consuming cannabis orally is that it has to be metabolized in your gut, and you have an enzyme system called the cytochrome P450 enzyme, which is the specific enzyme that breaks down cannabis. And when it breaks it down, a lot of the bioavailability or the actual content of the cannabis is basically degraded quite quickly.
Gotcha.
So if you have a cannabis plant that has 100% action, that enzyme will break it down to 20% action.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So that's huge.
Yeah. So consuming cannabis orally, although it is potent and effective, you're actually not going to get the full effect.
Yeah.
But there are companies in the medical cannabis space that are working on technological innovations that will bypass that metabolism process. So there are companies in Australia and in Israel that are developing what's called sublingual, like under the tongue, or buccal available, which is on the side of the cheek, absorption methods. So it bypasses the liver and is immediately absorbed through the bloodstream, and therefore you get the full effect of the cannabis.
So with taking cannabis orally compared to smoking, obviously smoking weed for that, you get that instant relief. But with the smoking, so if you're to, roll a joint, roll some medicinal marijuana, smoke it, get instant relief, so on and so forth. The act of smoking is bad for us, right?
Yeah, well, you're basically burning your lungs.
That's right. So how do you weigh up, like when we're talking about medicinal marijuana, how do people weigh up the positives versus the negatives when it comes to smoking compared to like orally ingesting?
Just vaporize it.
Okay.
Just get a vaporizer. You bypass the whole thing. It doesn't damage your lungs.
But aren't there studies that are showing that vaping is really bad for you as well?
Yeah, but those are studies that are related to actual vaping products.
Tobacco.
Yeah, like nicotine replacements and the additives that are used to actually create the liquid that can be vaporized. Where if you take there's two forms of vaporization. There's an extracted form, so you take the flower and you extract it into an oil and then you vape it. And then there's the actual just vaporizing of the flower. So you put the flower in a vaporizer and you just inhale. So both, there isn't there's no evidence, or there's very minimal evidence that has, stated that that's bad for you. It's when you burn the cannabis, that's when it becomes carcinogenic, when you're actually heating the plant to a point where it burns. Whereas vaporizing, it doesn't burn, it just what's called decomboxylates it. So it heats it up to a particular degree.
Mate, I'm telling you, I'm going to finish this show and I'm going to buy the world's biggest thesaurus.
Yeah,
and I'm going to spend tonight figuring out half of these words.
Yeah, well, okay, so decomboxylation is the process of heating cannabis up.
Yes.
Above a particular degree.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, so do you want me to go scientific or you want to keep it basic?
Nah, you got to keep it somewhat basic for me.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hanging in here. I'm doing my best.
Yeah, just give me a kick if you want me to,
a nudge below the table.
Yeah, nudge below the table. But because it just, the reason why I like going technical is because it demonstrates the complexities of this plant, which is, I thought in 2015, when I saw that Colorado and California were legalizing cannabis, I just thought it was hilarious. I believed the Americans, geniuses, have figured out how to get high without kind of getting arrested.
Yeah.
But then as you start to learn how cannabis works, it's pretty much a Pandora's box. There's so much we don't know about this plant. So what I was going to say is the reason you heat cannabis up is because cannabis, if you just ate a raw cannabis flower, you wouldn't get high.
Yeah.
Because the cannabis molecules are in their acid form. And in order to turn them into their actual base form, I'm not sure if base form is the right word, but to take THC and make it psychoactive, you have to heat it up.
Yeah.
And that's the process of called decarboxylation. So that's what a vaporizer does. It heats it to a particular degree where it doesn't burn the plant, but it heats it just enough to turn it from an acid into its active form, and therefore you have the psychoactive effects. Same with CBD, which is not a it is psychoactive. It's non-psychotropic. Yes. But it starts off as an acid, and then it converts into a molecule that can then have a psychoactive effect, and the other plethora of effects that it will have as well.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So. All right. No. Now, moving away from the science because my brain's just fully scrambled. So, when we're talking about medicinal marijuana, like, what are the best use cases that you see out there? Because you hear about it for pain. What other ailments is right at the top of the list for people that want to, use medicinal marijuana?
Some of the strongest research is in epilepsy.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's an anticonvulsant. It's an anti-inflammatory. Then this is specifically CBD. And that's probably where the basis of cannabis began, is with CBD. There's a girl in America named Charlotte Figge. She's a young woman. I think she was about 3 years old at the time, and she suffered from a rare form of epilepsy that was not being treated by the conventional medicines. And I don't know how Charlotte got onto cannabis, but she did. She got her way through a group that provided her CBD, and the effects were astounding. She completely was able to counteract the seizures.
This is a 3-year-old girl.
This is a 3-year-old girl.
Okay.
And
cool.
But this is CBD, no THC.
Yeah.
No THC.
Yeah.
So that led to an incredible plethora of research being developed around the world, even in Australia. A part of the kind of developmental story of how Australia got to where it is today was with a woman or a young girl named Caitlin Lambert, who as well at a very similar age suffered from the same form of epilepsy. Her parents found that story from America. They gave her CBD, and her hospital attendance rate decreased by more than 90%. She went from having thousands of seizures a week to having like 3.
Yeah, one of my favourite podcasters' name's Brendan Schaub, and he's host of 3 podcasts actually.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. He's one of the biggest podcasts in the world. He's Fighter and the Kid is his oldest one, and he's got Below the Belt, which is a MMA podcast, and then he's got King and the Sting, which is him and Theo Von, one of my other favourite comedians. He's really good. Anyway, he's got a young son, and he has epilepsy, and he now is a investor in something Spectrum.
Yeah. So that's Canopy. Yep.
Yeah,
and they own a company called Spectrum.
Pure Spectrum.
Okay.
Pure Spectrum.
Different company.
Yep. Yeah, Pure Spectrum CBD.
Yep.
He's now an investor, I believe, and he promotes it on the podcast and so forth. And I've heard him talk about, on dozens of occasions across all of his shows, so listen to lots of his stuff, about how it totally his son ceased to have any sort of epileptic seizures.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what else? What else?
So chronic pain is quite notable. Although the evidence for chronic pain is relatively moderate, the amount of anecdotal evidence that is available just basically puts it in the arena for this is a yes.
Yeah.
It does change the way that pain is modulated in the body. So that's mainly due to THC, which is an anxiolytic, and it also affects Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis. Some people claim that it can cure cancer, which I don't believe, but there is evidence that it can kill cancer cells. But more research needs to go into that field of inquiry because cancer, there are many mutations, so you can't say it kills cancer. You can say it kills particular types of cancer.
So let me ask you this just quickly. So on the regulation stuff, and let's talk about like the United States and Colorado and so forth. So with my question of like, what's the best use case? Like, what was the grounds on it being legalized or being first? It was first medicinal and then now legalized. Like, on what grounds? Like, what is the main driving factor for it?
Oh, well, first off, America, it's not legal. It's illegal. It's 33 states have created a program. 11 states have a recreational program and the rest have medical. However, it's a federal offense. The federal government hasn't legalized cannabis.
So federally it's illegal and locally it's...
Yeah, it's locally, it's okay. So there's a number of factors. Human stories and political pressure. A lot of it's tax revenue.
Yeah.
Colorado hit $1 billion this year in tax revenue.
So, okay, cool. So it's more of a cultural thing.
Yeah,
Would you say that's fair?
Yeah,
like in
definitely.
Colorado, for example, because people like smoking weed, and we should be able to have a fair bit of autonomy in what we do with our lives. Like, if you're not hurting anyone, rules are in place, laws are in place for if you break the rules in life.
I agree.
And we get pissed, and we break the rules. We get stoned, and we break the rules. We also break those same rules sober. So the rules are set. I don't think that's my opinion. I don't think you should be. It should be illegal to, get high, and to a certain degree, it should be illegal when you break the law. High or not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Especially with the contradictory use of alcohol.
Yeah.
But so it's really just a cultural push that made it legalized in states like Colorado.
Correct. It was a large part of it. Same in Australia. A lot of it came from political pressure from social movements.
Gotcha.
Yeah. This is a medicine of the people.
Yeah.
And a lot of this has come from the people. And I'm all for Mate, I'm a big advocate for drug reform in general. I think drugs should be just decriminalized like they've done in Portugal.
Me too.
And the results from Portugal from 2001 are astounding. There's been a lot of benefit for that decision. So I think drug reform is just the war on drugs, ridiculous.
Yeah, we're never going to win it.
There's nothing to win.
Yeah, well, think about it though. Like, I've been off my head on all kinds of drugs back when I was younger and whatever, party days and so on and so forth. There's not one example when I ever couldn't buy drugs. You know what I mean? Like, there's always going to be drug dealers, and we're always going to buy drugs from them. Why wouldn't they be safer? Why wouldn't the money go into, infrastructure, into the government's coffers? I mean, it's better than it going into the hands of the people that have it now.
Yeah, agreed.
But you must know. Like, talk to me about the Colorado, and from what I remember hearing crazy stats that, and mainly stats around like drunk driving and assaults and battery and all these. Everything was trending in the right direction, whatever those markers were. So, but you would know much more than me. So, like, talk to us about, some of the stats and so forth from Portugal, from Colorado, other states in the US.
Well, my favorite stat to talk about is in the states where cannabis was legalized for medical use, opioid and prescription drug were declined. The prescription rate of these opioids declined.
Yep.
And this is incredibly important because in 2017, 47,000 people died from opiate overdoses. And that is a major stat. So I think that there's a lot to learn from these countries where they've introduced these regulations and these laws. That's my favorite stat. From Portugal...
Can you say that stat again? Just so it's clear.
47,000 people in 2017 died from opioid overdoses. Yeah. 88,000 people from alcohol-induced death. Cannabis, 0.
Yeah.
Throughout history, 0.
And what about the amount of... Was there a drop in alcohol and opioid-related deaths once there was legal marijuana?
That I can't comment on.
Gotcha.
I don't know the stats on that.
Not putting words in your mouth. I just wasn't sure if there was a correlation.
Yeah, but it's the prescription rate. It's the prescription of opioids. They're starting to decline. People are migrating from opioids and using cannabis. So put one and one together,
good.
you get two. Yeah. So less people using opioids, less overdoses from opioids. So I think that's and also hospital-related opioid incidents decreased as well. And there isn't any solid evidence that drug driving accidents increased once cannabis was legalized as well. So in Portugal, I think it's interesting with decriminalization because the interesting facts were drug-related crimes decreased, adolescent use of drugs didn't decrease, and drug-related deaths decreased. So, I mean, these are all positive trends that you would expect to see, or maybe not expect to see, but would be surprised to see.
Yeah, happy to see.
Yeah, it's great. I really feel that we're at a point in time now, there's a revolution occurring with the way that the war on drugs has had such negative effects. And a great example is, let's look at the pre-1930s where alcohol was illegal. That's the era of Al Capone, the gangster. Era, Yeah. People were getting killed over alcohol.
Yeah.
Think about that today. Think about people. You're never going to see a turf war over alcohol today because it's completely regulated.
Yeah.
So once drugs are completely regulated and you can buy them through illegal means, eventually these drug wars will end. And that's the human casualties. It's just, it's preposterous.
Alcohol's funny though, isn't it? It's so incredibly bad for us.
Oh my God.
And statistically, it's one of the worst things we can do to our body. But it's not even spoken of as a drug. It's just, let's go have a beer or let's go get pissed. So it's called alcohol. There's drugs and alcohol, not drugs. And alcohol being one of those many drugs. You know what I mean?
Great point.
We're so, it's just funny. I think we're so hypocritical as a culture and a society, and I think the drug conversation is one of the, shining lights on how hypocritical we are, because if marijuana is to remain illegal, then how on earth is it okay to go and get drunk and drive your car into a, tree on the weekend?
It's not going to remain illegal. It's going to change. I mean, even 2 weeks ago, the ACT created regulations for adult use cannabis. I mean, it's all changing. But I agree, it's completely hypocritical. As I said before, 88,000 deaths a year for alcohol. And I guarantee you're never going to see someone get a king punch when they've smoked weed. It's freaking impossible.
Yeah, or taking mushrooms.
Yeah,
you're just going to get a big, massive hug.
That's sinking right there. It's just, look, we have to there's just too many hugs in the street, and too many people are ordering Domino pizzas.
Yeah, that's right. People have lost their private their personal space.
Yeah, it's crazy.
There's too much warm and fuzzies going on.
Yeah, there's a comedian that I really deeply appreciate. His name's Bill Hicks, and one of my favorite.
Yeah, I love Bill Hicks.
Yeah, you never hear a positive LSD story. Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration. I mean, and the positive stories. This is where I think media is perpetuated on fear as opposed to positive, kind of momentum.
It's 80-20 the wrong way around.
Yeah, it's full on. It's terrible.
The world would be totally different if the news was 80% positive and 20% negative. I genuinely believe that.
Get everyone to smoke weed and take mushrooms.
Yep.
Could you imagine? This is what Graham Hancock, a wonderful archaeologist, says, that if you're going to be a politician, you must, as a mandatory, do 7 sessions of ayahuasca.
Yeah, so, I've read Graham Hancock. I like Graham. Yeah, I like Graham. So talk to me about what's the biggest pushback for all this stuff? So there's this big tidal wave of positive groundswell for marijuana, for psilocybin, for MDMA, which isn't really a natural substance, but for the right use for PTSD and so on and so forth. So there's all this big swell of positivity, but what are the big pushbacks? What are we up against?
Stigma. Mainly stigma around. The propaganda campaigns were pretty significant, and for more than 80 years, this has been a demonized substance. These substances, plural, have been demonized. So you're fighting stigma. So that's the biggest barrier, and that's not just, and that's a cultural barrier. That's the greatest challenge. Is when you said marijuana before, I'm trying to reform the word and try and bring it back to cannabis. Because marijuana has such negative connotations to it. So trying to call things cannabis, even magic mushrooms, call it psilocybin.
That's right.
It's just reframing the language profile and then presenting valid evidence, which is still a challenge because my grandmother, bless her soul, for example, she suffers from a particular illness, and I've shown her that there's evidence that supports cannabis to treat that illness, and there's nothing of it. No, I'm not going to look at this.
Even people our age, I've and rightly or wrongly, I've talked about the benefits of psilocybin and studies and so forth. And I'm no shaman and I'm not a healer or anything, but I've done certain things in the past that really helped my friends, and I've just with really low levels of stress and so forth gone into certain experiences. But most people that I would bring that up with, and I'm not a woo kind of guy. I'm not a real left sipping mushroom coffees all day every day. That's not me, But I still, but even people really push back on the whole idea, and that's even some of people our age and so forth. So your grandma, I can totally imagine. But yeah, the reason why I kind of like when you mentioned Graham Hancock, I feel like I love Graham Hancock. I think he's great, and he's driving a lot of good things forward. But we need more people that are widely respected in the scientific community to drive things forward. So,
Great.
So Graham, although he's done a lot of really great things, and a lot of his things that he was bringing up in the 1990s are now, coming through and showing to be true. But have you ever read his book Supernatural?
I have not.
Don't read it. Don't read
All right.
it. It's like, I love Graham, and I was reading the book, and I was just like, Jesus Christ, man! Like, it's so out there and woo. It is, man, and that's why, like, I think. Who was Public Enemy number 1 in 1970s from Richard Nixon with the psilocybin?
Wasn't drugs Public Enemy number 1?
Yeah, no, but who was
Timothy Leary.
Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary, for example,
fucked a lot of stuff up.
He fucked it, He went too hard, and he went at it from the drop acid, not bombs. That wasn't Timothy Leary, but that was like his movement. And we need, for example, have you read How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan?
I have seen Michael Pollan live. I haven't read his book.
Yep.
Excellent advocate for the cause.
Yeah, exactly. So we need, this is why with Graham Hancock and people of that nature, we need more people that can drive it forward, that come at it from a totally non-biased opinion. And Michael Pollan is a perfect example of that. He's I've read the book, I've seen him live as well. Mid-50s, I would say, guessing his age, but a guy who comes at it from a totally scientific background, no history of tripping, so on and so forth. And he's like, okay, there's something here. There's studies that are being shown, and I'm going to go do my own research and come up with my own theories. And even he, everyone's excited, but we still need to be real about where we're at. So I think, I think the stigma is for sure going to carry on for a certain time longer. But I think data, we're such we drive things through data. Like Silicon Valley has shown us, and the rise of the internet, that if something showed, if the data shows that this works, then it works. And that's, with, you used psilocybin as an example earlier before the show. It's getting, pushed through at a rapid rate testing-wise, because it's shown to be way more
efficacious.
Way more efficacious for a number of different things. So the stigma, you reckon? Yeah,
well, I love there's so many riff points there. But science, spirituality starts where science ends. It's a cool statement. A friend of mine told me that, and props up to AL. And he basically said to me, spirituality starts where science ends, because science is the tool that measures and allows us to kind of like see further out into the abyss. And it's very challenging. I call it empathetic communication. There are a lot of advocates who, bless their souls, really care about the betterment of society. Yep. However, you're dealing with a construct of different humans that see the world very differently. And if you just push the hard line without the evidence or without the material that they need to change their mind, then you're going to just be fighting up against a wall. Yeah. Whereas someone like Michael Pollan is very considerate. He says we need more research. We can't just jump into this boat without knowing whether or not it will sink. You don't want another Titanic. So, and it's the same thing happening in the cannabis space. I mean, just this week, the FDA submitted warnings to a number of companies that are making bogus claims about how CBD can cure X, Y, and Z. And that's where I feel we need to take a mature approach to research, because people can get taken advantage of.
Yeah, and that devalues the whole thing that everyone's trying to achieve.
Yeah,
fake results and so forth, and pushing narratives that aren't really true, It's like Wim Hof. I'm sure you're aware of Wim Hof.
Yeah, he's been on your podcast.
Yeah, yes. He's been on the podcast. It was great. Love Wim. He's the best guy ever. But it's funny, it took so very, 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 very long for Wim to be able to show his methods and for them to be actually studied by universities and people throwing funding at him and so on and so forth. And I believe the reason is because he's a fucking space cadet. You know what I mean? Like he's the most lovely guy of all time, but he's so left of center that no one's going to take him seriously until it got to the point where there was the studies on the group that he trained to regulate their own autoimmune
and the salmonella studies and all that. Yeah.
Like there's some real stuff, but it took data and it took so long to push that. Whereas, say for example, Michael Pollan has this new technique of managing and controlling your autoimmune response of your body. Michael Pollan writes a book about it. Michael Pollan starts doing speeches about it. It's going to be totally different because, unfortunately, with people that are hippie-like and really left leaning kind of crew, I think they are fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, it's drinking the Kool-Aid. It's when you drink too much of your own Kool-Aid, you're diluting your own potency to translate the message.
Yeah.
And it's empathetic communication. And Wim is amazing. What a human. I mean, that guy is just, you talk about forget cannabis, just breathe.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a potent message right there.
Yeah,
so that's complete sovereignty and ownership over human health. So I think that it's absolutely essential to have the change makers, the visionaries. It needs to be coupled with people that have that credible background that can come in and say, hey, look, let's take this, apply the scientific method on it, and see what we can do. Can we repeat this? Can we test this? Can we ensure that there's a consistent profile of efficacy of proving the point? So that we can then go out and say, hey, this is actually this. It's not this. It's not maybe this, that, or the other. It's this, and it's 100% this, time after time again. And then look, that's challenging. I mean, it's very challenging because then you throw a placebo effect in there, and everyone's confused because the placebo effect is probably one of the most potent medicines on the planet.
Yeah.
And
the nocebo effect.
Yeah, and the nocebo effect. Even I was listening to a podcast the other day where the researcher said that even when people know that it's a placebo, it still works in certain cases.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy what this thing is, the operating system.
Yeah,
this thing is the power.
100%.
So it's just understanding how to translate the vision into a way that it can be received by the masses. And it seems that the cultural norm right now is changing from a conservative, research-driven base to a more intuitive feeling base. But it's always good to have research. It's always good to take that approach, I feel at least.
Yeah, well, nothing's going to be fully adopted into our culture unless it's, the data shows that it's going to work.
You're just vulnerable for being taken advantage of.
Well,
if you don't.
That might not be a true statement. There might be drug reform where it is just, everything is legalized and that might be, only around the corner. Who knows? We really don't know. But for you, for example, what do you think I'm sure you've done a lot of thinking about this and so forth, being in the field that you're in. What do you think the future of drug reform, the future of medicinal marijuana, psychedelics, what do you think the landscape looks like in 2, 5, 10, 20 years?
Ooh, well, currently you mentioned MDMA, so MAPS group in America is conducting phase 3 clinical trials. And that's really, the golden standard of how medicine is adopted is through clinical trials. You take a subset of people and you put them through a number of processes to determine does a medicine work. Cannabis, psilocybin, MDMA, and other medicines are now currently going through that process. So in 5 to 10 years' time, you're going to see that these medicines, which have been long touted as having these effects, will actually be proved through the scientific measure having those effects. Then it's really a cascade effect because the same system that's been designed to kind of keep these things kind of under the rug are going to be the same systems that kind of proliferate them to the entire mass community. So in 5 to 10 years' time, I imagine that these medicines will be completely adopted. There'll be new therapy modalities. There'll be new healing modalities. Personalized medicine will be available because cannabis technically should be treated like a personalized medicine because it's a complex plant. And again, I don't want to bog you down with the science.
Lots of different strains and so forth.
Yeah, well, there's more than 700 compounds present in that plant and they work differently. If you remove certain compounds, the plant will work differently. If you add certain compounds, it will work differently. So there's a researcher whose name's Ethan Russo, and he proposed that there is what's called endocannabinoid deficiency, where my deficiencies in my endocannabinoids might be different to yours, which might lead to a different sickness for me and a different sickness for you. So cannabis A strain might work better for me, whereas cannabis B strain will work better for you. And that's personalized medicine right there. So I think that cannabis itself will encourage more personalized medicine, whereas psilocybin and other psychedelics are going to completely revolutionize mental health and the way that, because the current therapy or the current pharmaceutical system is symptom relief system where you take a medicine for the rest of your life to relieve a symptom. You don't rip out the root cause.
Yeah, that's right.
Psychedelics, no room for that. Let's rip it all out. And therefore, we won't need the psychedelics after. And that's human health. That's what I hope it will become. It's what I trust it will become.
Yeah, that is a tough one though, isn't it? That's if that is the case in a lot of different, say there's 20 different ailments that we can fix through, use of plant medicines and so forth, and it's a 1, 2 or 3 use solution, that cripples a multi-billion-dollar industry. So, and let's not be super, tinfoil hat and so forth about it, but I mean, that's just basic economics. There's going to be a lot of pushback, and there already is. This is why half the reason why this stuff is, is still getting held back and so forth is because, the big pharma don't want to push it through. So that's a whole nother problem in itself. But
I mean, from your time, you've done a lot of travel, I presume. You're a travel company.
I've been to 45 countries there.
So when you've traveled different countries, what's the current kind of consensus on drug reform itself and cannabis and other medicines? Do you find that there are cultures around the world and people around the world that are seeing the same light as we are, or is there anywhere particular that you've been that have pushed back more than others? I mean,
but this isn't my field,
Yeah.
This isn't my field. When I'm traveling, and this isn't the first thing that I'm bringing up over a dinner table, or a couple of beers, or meeting someone in a hotel or a hostel or whatever. This is not something that I talk about regularly. This is something I'm interested in. I've read books about, and I've watched multiple, this, that, and the other, and talk to people like yourself. Something that I'm very interested, but it's not something that I've spoken widely to, people about, particularly on my travels, I've traveled a lot where I'm running a tour for people, and I've traveled a lot as a young backpacker, young to 26, 27, but still this stuff hasn't really been top of mind. So, it's probably not a good answer for you there with that one.
Would it be due to the stigma profile or just a lack of interest?
Me?
Yeah.
With this conversation? No, just due to neither of those. Not due to lack of interest and not due to stigma. Due to the fact that there's a lot of stuff to talk about in the world. You know what I mean? Like I've had 200 shows on this podcast, and there's 50 different topics that I'm absolutely fascinated by that could be the first thing I want to talk to someone about at any drop of the hat, any conversation. You know what I mean? I'm not in your shoes. Your shoes, you've been in this field for a long time, it's probably one of the first things you bring up because you got very valuable stuff to talk about, and, you want to hear other people's opinion and so on and so forth. But that's not been me really. So, I can't really comment there, I guess. But I do think it is very, very exciting stuff. I think, I lean towards, psilocybin. I've never really... Well, I've smoked weed when I was younger, but I've never smoked it medicinally. I've never played around the last few years, but I'm very, very big on psychedelics and what they can do for us as a society. I have a big problem with the rise of the mental health epidemic that we're really in. There's a lot of unhappy people out there, and psilocybin in particular is just I think will be a godsend.
I agree.
It really will, and. I probably shouldn't say this on the podcast, but I had a friend who knew that I'd been playing around with magic mushrooms, and so basically I'd been microdosing for once every 4 or 5 days for a decent stretch of time, and it basically the first time I took mushrooms was my mate Tommy Sira gave me some mushrooms, and we were going to do them together. He was going to kind of spot me. We've known each other for absolutely ever. He knows me like the back of his hand, and he actually was busy that night, the night that we'd planned. He's like, I've had something come up. I'm like, man, I want to take him tonight. He goes, you'll be right. I trust you. Don't worry about it. Just get yourself comfortable, blah, blah, blah. And I did and whatever. But one of the questions I asked him, I said, how will I feel afterwards? Because I'm used to party drugs, like coming down or hangovers, whatever. And I said, how will I feel afterwards? He goes, bro, because I was stressing out. He goes, bro, you're going to feel like your brain's had a massage. But dead set. So I was playing around with microdosing. I did a lot of research, spoke to a lot of people, so on and so forth. And then I'd have the macro dose as well from time to time. And that was cool. And I'd been talking to a few friends about it. One of my friends had been, she was suicidal and had been for 4 or 5 months. Otherwise a really happy girl. But due to a bunch of stuff that had happened in her life and all these changes and some business stuff and her mum being sick, she had become suicidal and like constant thoughts of like wanting to kill herself day to day. And she asked me, she told me, really like in confidence, because she hadn't really let anyone know, but for some reason she felt comfortable to tell me. And then I would talk to her and just, see how she was doing. And then she brought up, mushrooms and maybe, do you think it might work for me? I know that, all these studies are coming out, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, you know what? I'm not a shaman and I don't ever want to profess to be that. I'm not a healer. I'm not a this. I'm not a that. I said, if you want to buy a bunch of magic mushrooms and me and you go out to the Dandenongs and we'll get like a place out there and we can just trip balls for a night and, just as mates would do taking mushrooms, I'm happy to do that with you if you want to do that. No sitting there and chanting and, blowing smoke at each other.
No woo-woo.
No woo-woo. We literally took 2 grams of mushrooms each, played fucking Scrabble for 4 hours, the funniest game of Scrabble you've ever seen in your life, and had had a great night. And then I asked her how she was feeling 2 days later. She said, yeah, I feel really good. Asked her a week later. She said, I feel fucking amazing. And then she thanked me 2 months later or 3 months later for saving her life.
Yeah, amazing.
She called me up and thanked me for saving her life. And that's anecdotal, right? That's there's no stats to show. There's no data. This is not a controlled experiment, whatever. But that's my experience. I've had good personal experience with using it myself. That's the only time I've ever, done anything like that with a friend. And 3 months later, she genuinely said, oh, you saved my life. Like, it's fucking crazy. So I can't wait for the world to change. I can't wait for the future. I think there's definitely a lot of hurdles that we have to, jump and hoops we have to jump through. But we got a lot of momentum.
Yeah, we got a lot of momentum. And first off, thank you for sharing that. That's a deep and beautiful story. And there's
cool.
a lot of anecdotal reports where the psilocybin has a 3 to 6 month kind of afterglow effect.
Yeah.
So that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Complete sense. And we've got a lot of momentum. The train's left the station. The number of cannabis companies that are in existence, the number of psilocybin companies that are starting. I told you before the podcast that there's a group in the States that just developed a bacteria that poops out psilocybin. There's a
still don't know what that means.
Yeah, they basically their excrement is psilocybin. They engineered the bacteria to poop out psilocybin. I mean, the train has left the station. There's no turning back now. There is no way that this is going to be locked down again. It's impossible.
Yeah, there's too much good data.
Yeah, thanks internet as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a proliferation of knowledge sharing. It's like the brain. The network is just interconnected, and these pathways are now forming, and new information is rising. So people are now, they've got more knowledge and they can make more informed decisions. Our generation is a generation based on knowledge and informed data, whereas previous generations is just, here's the gospel, thank you, see you later.
Oh yeah, hundreds of years ago it was illegal to reprint the Bible.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Hilarious.
It was illegal to only your local priest could tell you the word of the Lord.
Makes sense.
Controlling
that's the authority, of course.
Controlling the information, really. So yeah, we are in a fully new age. It's bloody exciting. So, well, I mean, and where do you want to be in oh, shit. Could I have stuttered more in that sentence? Sorry, let me rephrase that.
All right.
Where do you want to be in the next, 2, 3, 5? What's next for you, Adam?
Breathing is an important one. I want to keep breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's
above ground.
Put that one up there.
Yeah.
Where would I like to
I
be?
wish you best with that.
Thank you. As do I you. Where do I want to be? I want to be deeper in research. I want to be involved in more studies and understanding the complexities of how cannabis and other psychedelics work. I really care about these spaces. So my intention is to continue building relationships with researchers and industry and formulating those relationships to propel each other forward, because research needs funding and funding needs a good place to put the money. So trying to form those connections. And you asked before what I did. So I also started an initiative called the Medical Cannabis Council a few years ago, which is now the largest industry association in the country.
Cool.
For cannabis. And it's about bridging connections. So I just want to continue what I'm doing today, making connections and having cool conversations like this to deepen knowledge bases. That's really it. I mean, even what we've shared, I've learned I need to simplify the endocannabinoid system.
Yeah, I think you do. I genuinely do think you do. Like, because the more people that can understand your message, I understand your message. I really do. I've understood everything you've said, but there is the deeper part of the science that does go over your head, and it's like, oh yeah, you know what I mean? So yeah, but I think most of the listeners, probably all the listeners, will understand the message as well. But yeah, I think simple is better. You know, simple is always better. You know, you write marketing copy, you write it to a 7th grade student.
Yeah.
You know, you don't ever want to make it too hard for everybody to understand. You know, and same with, I guess, any sort of storytelling you're trying to get people around. That's my theory anyway. You remind me of a guy named Thomas King. Have you ever heard of Thomas King? He's a Victorian bloke.
Yeah.
He's so not really in the way you get about, just in what you're doing. So I had him on the podcast it would have been about 18 months ago, and he's one of the more impressive dudes I've met. So he looks about 28. He was at the time he was 21. It's unfathomable this dude. It was 21, specifically with what he was doing. So he is the CEO of a company and founder of a company called Food Frontier. The Food Frontier or Food Frontier. And basically, I saw him speaking at an event like a mini TEDx. It was not really mini. It's about the size of a TEDx, but just a local one. It's called Real Big Things. A friend of mine's brother runs it. And anyway, he talked about the clean meat revolution that's on its way. So, and we talk about like Beyond Meat burgers and stuff that are in grilled now, and you can get Beyond Meat, you know, hot dogs at other places around Melbourne or whatever.
Have you tried them?
Yeah, I had one last night.
How are they?
They're unfathomably good. You can't tell that they're plant-based.
Really?
They look, smell, taste, texture, everything like real meat.
Wow, I'd like to try that.
Fucking wild. It's fully wild. But, so Tom King, his company, so there's two things in the clean meat revolution, and that's plant-based meat substitutes like Beyond Meat, but instead of them being vegan patties, they are vegan patties, but they're actually indistinguishable from real meat. Pretty much. Like they're really crazy. There's that, and then there's clean meat, which is meat grown in a laboratory, soon to be in a brewery.
Like in vitro meat,
yeah. That's right. So, and that's the real exciting thing. So, but what Tom King does is Thomas King, he and Food Frontier, he actually puts, similar to what you just said, he puts the researchers in with the scientists. He puts the researchers and the scientists in with the industry. You know, and it's what needs to happen. You know, so I think it's very exciting stuff, and both of you guys, it's very similar. You remind me of each other's plights. You know, you're both very driven and very passionate about.
Thank you.
You know, getting an industry that's going to be reformed in an amazing way, and trying to facilitate it and make it happen. So
thank you, and props up to Tom. That's a very important space.
Sick, man. It's so exciting.
Yeah, we live in one of the most amazing times. It's what a blessing to be here today to see this all unfold.
Yeah.
Seriously cool stuff.
Yeah, no, it is. All right, Adam, before we wrap it up, where can people find you? Anything you want to plug? Now's your time.
If anyone's interested to learn more about cannabis and the global landscape, how it's developing, I do a weekly newsletter that I put together myself. I spend hours putting this thing together every week. It's if you go to BuddingTech.com, BuddingTech.com, and subscribe to the mailing list. I'll add you, and every Sunday you'll get a bit of information from me about what's going on in the space and my insights and what I think is going to continue happening. Insight Adam is my Twitter handle, and LinkedIn, Adam Isaac Miller. If you want to hit me up and have a chat, I'm open to discussion.
Cool. Yeah. No worries. Well, Adam, thanks for coming on the show, mate. It's been great.
Yeah, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap.